Hello everyone, welcome to yet another day in the Clown Decade, and my lord, if you ever wanted proof that the Clown Decade is getting worse before it gets better, well, buckle in because today's video is absolutely astronomically moronic. Because absolutely everything about this weekend's Palestine protests, which also saw some counter-protesting from quote-unquote far-right activists, has ended up with pretty much absolutely everybody involved looking like a total moron. So we may as well just get right into this because I'm so fed up of covering this week after week. So here is a statement from the Met Police about the weekend. This operation took place in unique circumstances against a backdrop of conflict in the Middle East on Armistice Day and the following a week of intense debate about protest and policing. These all combined to increase community tensions. The extreme violence from the right-wing protesters towards the police today was extraordinary and deeply concerning. They arrived early, stating that they were there to protect monuments, but some were already intoxicated, aggressive, and clearly looking for confrontation. Well, I suppose when people don't feel like the Met Police are doing their jobs properly, you will get all sorts of people trying to do the job for them. Abuse was directed at officers protecting the cenotaph, including chants of "You're not English anymore." This group were largely football hooligans from across the UK and spent most of the day attacking or threatening officers who were seeking to prevent them from being able to confront the main march. Well, given that they were there to protect mainly the cenotaph, and apparently the pro-Palestine protest was supposed to be nowhere near the cenotaph, I don't see what the issue would be with them going near the cenotaph. If they are trying to stop drunken, aggressive people from getting to a main march that has offensive slogans and people dressed up as terrorists, as we will get into a bit later, then I could understand that. But if you are directly stopping them from trying to get to the cenotaph, that's a bit more strange. Because this is all just going off what this police statement is at the moment. We will obviously go through the evidence a little bit later. Many in these groups were stopped and searched, and weapons including a knife, a baton, a knuckle duster were found, as well as Class A drugs. Thanks to the considerable efforts of our officers who put themselves in harm's way, nobody was able to reach the cenotaph, which was protected at all times. Well done, I suppose. Well done, you stopped anyone getting near the cenotaph on Armistice Day. We are in such a clown world that no one is allowed near the cenotaph on Armistice Day. That's how clown world this country is at the moment, by the way. You are not allowed near the monument that is dedicated to Armistice Day on Armistice Day because of a conflict that is happening on the other side of Europe. Or because the police don't want you anywhere near there because they are worried that there will be violence against a protest that is supposed to be on the other side of London. I don't get any of this logic. 9 officers were injured during the day. 2 required hospital treatment with a fractured elbow and a suspected dislocated hip. Those officers were injured on Whitehall as they prevented a violent crowd getting to the cenotaph while a remembrance service was taking place. While the Palestine Solidarity Campaign march did not see the sort of physical violence carried out by the right wing, we know that for London's Jewish communities whose fears and concerns were absolutely recognised, the impact of hate crime, in particular anti-Semitic offences, is just as significant. So the claim by the Metropolitan Police here so far is that there were large far-right groups trying to get to the cenotaph, which they successfully stopped them from getting to the cenotaph, and there was widespread violence in the group, and weapons such as knives and knuckle dusters found along with Class A drugs in a group of intoxicated and aggressive men, who no doubt were mostly white as well. Whereas apparently on the other side of London, whom these officers were apparently protecting from the aggressive far-righties, you did not see that sort of physical violence being carried out, but instead you just saw a few hate crimes, including anti-Semitic hate crimes, which genuinely you seem to be able to get away with not quite as much as anti-white racist hate crimes, but certainly a surprising amount given that the Jews are supposed to control everything, according to many of the protesters, well, not necessarily many, but a few of the spokespeople at the Palestinian Peace March. At the end of the Palestine March, we once again saw breakaway groups behaving in an intimidating manner. Officers intercepted a group of 150 who were wearing face coverings and firing fireworks. Arrests were made after some of the fireworks struck officers in the face. Well, that's better than last week, where 4 officers were injured by fireworks and no arrests were made, or at least they didn't make a statement about it. There were also a number of serious offences identified in relation to hate crime and possible support of prescribed organisations during the protest that we are actively investigating. Locating and intercepting suspects in a crowd that size we saw today will always be challenging, but we were further limited in our ability to do so to the number of officers we had to deploy from early in the day in response to violence from right-wing groups in central London. So the long and short of it is that both sides were bad, but obviously the far right was worse, especially when it came to violence. And the thing is, from the scenes around the Cenotaph and elsewhere in Whitehall, there was clearly violence from these groups. For example, in Whitehall, I believe a couple of streets away from the Cenotaph, there were clearly a large group of people who obviously everyone is going to call far right, simply for shouting things like,
"This is fucking our country! This is our country!"
when they are clearly unhappy with the way that the police have been handling intimidating marches, clearly offensive signs, which, by the way, I don't even think offensive signs should be a chargeable offence necessarily, but if it is going to be a chargeable offence, please apply the law fairly. And clearly they seem much more hands-on with the type of policing against people who simply want to go to the Cenotaph. And yes, this is violence. Yes, I don't think that there should be crowds doing this. But it's not like there is a police line between the Palestinian march and these people that are clearly being violent. They are between them and the Cenotaph. And by the way, this is all they wanted to do. Simply go and observe a 2-minute silence and make sure that it's not being desecrated on the day that it is supposed to be commemorating. Because they have absolutely no trust in you that you will do something like that. Because, as I showed last week, there were people who had to fix up desecrated war memorials. This guy's going up, replacing the poppy wreaths and removing a Palestinian flag. Because clearly the police can't do their job and protect sites like this on the most important days of the year for these memorials. And so they wanted to do it themselves. And if the police aren't going to protect the memorials from the people that are going to desecrate them, I don't understand why they're trying to protect them from people who are outwardly just saying that they want to protect it themselves. They don't seem to have bothered very well in the past. Why would they start now? It's obviously selective policing. And in response to all this far-right violence, quote-unquote, Rishi Sunak had this statement. "I condemn the violent, wholly unacceptable scenes we have seen today from the EDL and associated groups and Hamas sympathisers attending the National March for Palestine." I don't know why he's bringing up the EDL. The EDL disbanded in like 2015. "The despicable actions of a minority of people undermine those who have chosen to express their views peacefully. Remembrance Weekend is a time for us to come together as a nation and remember those who fought and died for our freedoms. What we have seen today does not defend the honour of our armed forces, but utterly disrespects them." I genuinely wouldn't be shocked if there were ex-armed forces in those quote-unquote far-right crowds. And I'm yet to actually see a single person at a Palestine march with a poppy, let alone any evidence that anyone from the Palestine march respected the 2-minute silence at 11 AM. That is true for EDL thugs attacking police officers and trespassing on the Cenotaph, and this is true of the singing anti-Semitic chants and brandishing pro-Hamas signs and clothing on today's protest. I mean, at least we are seeing the Prime Minister actively announce that, yes, there are troublesome people on the pro-Palestine marches and they need to be dealt with. At least we're getting that. "The fear and intimidation the Jewish community have experienced over the weekend is deplorable. All criminality must be met with the full and swift force of the law. That is what I told the Met Police Commissioner on Wednesday. That is what they are accountable for, and that is what I expect. I'll be meeting the Met Police Commissioner in the coming days." Honestly, not the worst announcement or reaction I have seen to this weekend, but certainly not the best. I mean, my whole thing with this is, why are the police so bothered about stopping this group from getting near the Cenotaph when clearly their biggest worry is if this march and the pro-Palestine march come together and have a bit of a conflict? However, it is really, really irritating me just how much of the pro-Palestine violence and intimidation is being downplayed. You'll see the odd virtue signal of saying, oh, intimidating the Jews is quite bad. Let's have a look at these signs and people dressed up as terrorists, but there's way worse things than that. Because there is way worse than just some signs and some intimidation going on. There are all sorts of things being said on megaphones, going from the patently absurd.
Digital tyranny and robot dogs. They want to enslave humanity. That's how they want to control the people in Palestine in the future. Robot dogs with tasers and guns and drones.
Yes, we have the weird conspiracy of Palestine being under a futuristic cyberpunk occupation by Israel, who are using robot dogs with tasers to keep them in check. I mean, I don't even think it's unrealistic that we'll see those robot dogs with tasers in the future. I just think it's a patently absurd thing to say right in the middle of Israel steamrolling Gaza. I think they have more effective and direct means than trying to put a load of money into Boston Dynamics. However, there was even more absurdity when people dressed up as terrorists also decided to go into a Pret and shout things like this.
Boycott this place, it's owned by McDonald's. They're spewing genocide, everyone. Everyone in here is giving money to Israel. Walk out right now. Go and get your drinks. Get out. Don't get anything from here.
From anywhere else but Pret. Come on now. Out you come.
Use the toilets and that's all. This is all the work. You know, toilets. Don't do anything else. Don't buy one single drink from here.
I mean, it wouldn't be so bad if it was just a load of weirdos going in and shouting things like that. It's just the fact that he's dressed up like this. I just can't think why you dress up like this for any reason other than intimidation. Face coverings are always quite a weird thing in British culture. People really don't like it when you wear them. I used to wear a balaclava when it was really cold when I was younger, about 15, 16, and I would get a lot of dirty looks in public. So dressing up as this while also shouting at a load of people who are just buying a coffee that they are supporting genocide, yeah, you can see why that's pretty intimidating. Anyway, then we get to way worse things being said.
How old was I, sir? How old was she? So you can't answer. So you can't answer.
9 years old. She was not 9 years old. Killers! Killers! Death to all the Jews! Fucking Hitler!
You just have random people in the middle of, I assume this is a train station, in the middle of an argument between pro-Palestine protesters and someone who obviously disagrees. Just someone shouting in the middle of it things that are just as bad as what got Count Dankula fined 800 quid for posting his pug on Twitter. Well, it's YouTube actually, but still, you get the idea. And I'm sure this is one of the many cases that the Met Police are going to be investigating, but it's got to be asked over and over again, apparently. How has it got to a situation where people are comfortable enough to effectively call for a genocide like this, while also calling the other side genociders? It is an absurd situation, and it is one that we have been promised over and over again as a problem that will be solved, and yet we're just seeing the problem get worse and worse and worse. This wasn't the only example of someone feeling confident enough to call for a genocide of Jews, by the way. Here's someone else from London happily speaking his mind on camera and into a microphone.
If the West feels so sorry for the Israeli Zionists, why don't they give a place in Germany? Why don't they go to Hitler's back garden and make an occupation there? Then they will know what kind of people these are. Why every so many 100 years the Zionists get slaughtered? Because Hitler knew how to deal with these people. They probably made a program so they can create a state of Israel in the expense of Palestinian Muslims' blood.
Yes, here is a man in the middle of the streets of London, on camera, into a microphone, in front of a bunch of people who think ceasefire just means, oh, no more war, won't that be good? Saying that the Holocaust was a good idea. Now, naturally, I am against thinking that the Holocaust was a good idea. I think it was one of the worst human atrocities known to man. But here we have someone on the pro-Palestine side actively shouting out in front of a load of people as well. I highly doubt they can't hear what he's saying, calling for a genocide of the Jews. And this is a problem. And part of the reason why so many people feel the need to go to the cenotaph to defend it from the people like this, because they are going to hate the British as well, because the British effectively made the state of Palestine, or at least paved the way for it. So naturally they're going to hate the British war dead. And the police really don't seem to be active in trying to root these people out, get them arrested and put in jail or deported. They don't seem to be doing an awful lot despite the 120 odd arrests. All they're really saying is, oh, a few people were dressed up as terrorists and there were some signs that we didn't really like the look of. That's what we're looking into. Nothing about the people calling for genocide, though, unless that comes under the umbrella of offensive material. And don't get me wrong, I do understand that the Met Police are going to want to investigate people who have directly attacked their officers first, which it's hard to argue against the fact that that was happening given the video evidence from the people at the cenotaph. However, there was absolutely nothing said in that statement about this. Now, that might be quite difficult to actually work out what's going on there, but that is a whole bunch, well over 100 people, shouting at Michael Gove, of all people, "Shame on you," presumably for being part of the cabinet that is actively pro-Israel and anti-Hamas. And the thing is, it wasn't just at the train station as Michael Gove was on the way home. They actually seem to have followed him down quite a few streets.
Yo, lads, I swear this is Michael Gove. Well, he's getting rushed.
Yes, there were breakaway groups that were harassing and trying to intimidate and just ask questions, bro, to Michael Gove. And it's actually quite a sizable crowd. That's... I'd estimate over 100 people yet again have followed Michael Gove out of the train station and to wherever he is going, shouting "shame on you" again. Now, bear in mind this was the day after the police statement that we read at the start, but I have not seen anything from the Met Police about this incident. Though Michael Gove has made a statement himself saying that the Met Police were indeed helping him, but you just have to ask. There were scores of officers at the cenotaph blocking it from people whose only problem were with the police, not at all the cenotaph, and here's Michael Gove, a public figure, MP here, being harassed by 100 people, and not a police officer in sight. No one from the British Transport Police when he was at the station, not a single officer on the street here to help him out. Because you've got to bear in mind, it's not even been 2 years since David Armes, who had been stabbed at a constituency surgery by a Islamist. And given that there are people dressing up as terrorists and saying that any sort of support for Israel is genocide, it's not really a far-reaching conclusion, and it's certainly not a reach at all to maybe suspect that Michael Gove was indeed in some type of physical danger here. I mean, luckily he wasn't and nothing happened to him, but you've got to bear in mind we are actually in a dangerous state of play at this point. You know, the national terror level threat is substantial at this point. It is actually quite likely that there is going to be some sort of terrorist attack. And it ain't going to be done by a load of guys who just want to go to the cenotaph. It's going to be done by the people calling for genocide and saying that the British state is a supporter of genocide, believe it or not. So it blows my mind that Michael Gove has just been left to his own devices there, while there are people going around these protests dressed as terrorists. The green bandana with the Arabic writing on there, that is a Hamas headband. These are active pro-Hamas supporters. But even just having the face scarf, that is enough for me to say that you are dressed up as a terrorist, you know? There's no reason to hide your face at these protests unless you are pro-terrorist or cosplaying as one. It is similar garb to those that terrorise the Israelis wore. It is a bit like going to a rally in a classic Hugo Boss outfit, we're talking 1930s to 40s, and then trying to claim that you are not a Nazi sympathiser, whether you have the armband or not. And the thing is, you know, the police were even caught in pictures with these people. Here's a picture of a couple of officers with a particularly young child who is dressed up in a similar way. You've got to ask, why would any parent dress their child up as a Hamas terrorist? And why are the police getting pictures with any sort of protester? The police can't be seen to be pro either side when it comes to policing a community. And yet here they are happily kneeling down next to someone dressed as a terrorist. Ooh, they've got a Palestine flag saying "Save our children" on it. Yeah, but he's dressed up as a terrorist. With the police giving, well, for lack of a better term, half smiles in the picture as well. And what do the Met Police have to say about this? We always encourage our officers to be engaging and friendly with the public. Fine. However, in the context of a protest about such a contentious issue, we acknowledge it is not advisable for the officer to agree to pose for a photograph. No action will be taken against the officer who we have no reason to think was doing it for anything other than trying to positively engage. I mean, it's classic Met Police. Oh yeah, this is a bad look. We'll do nothing about it. Because all the Met Police really are the Guardian writers' almost armed wing. They have to focus pretty much exclusively on far-right groups that are apparently miles away from where the pro-Palestine protest is supposed to be anyway, so why the officers need to deal with them, I don't know. They are not protecting Tory MPs, and while there are pictures of them isolating a group of 150 people who were causing trouble, so I suppose I have to give them credit for that. As according to the police, they were firing fireworks and wearing face coverings, so good on them for getting some of them. They also had a pretty decent long thread on effectively saying that we are looking out for people with offensive billboards. and some people who are committing hate crimes. And the thing is, you can go through this thread yourself. Absolutely none of them are the examples that I brought up today. And my examples weren't even difficult to find, so I find it quite worrying that the Met Police only seem to be able to start cases on a fraction of the people that are actually causing issues, and they seem to care a lot more about Rishi Sunak and Suella Braverman being called coconuts, which, yes, that's offensive and racist, but I don't think it should be a crime. In fact, I'm actually quite shocked they're investigating this, so I suppose there's some good news there. But this is part of the problem that I'm seeing with the policing of these protests so far. They don't seem to actually be able to make any active arrests, apart from the 150 they managed to cover firing off fireworks. It always seems to be this kind of retrospective policing, where it's record what is going on in the protest, and then see if the Guardian journalists think that it's okay for you to try and arrest these people. And apparently coconuts are on the iffy side of the issue. I mean, they're good enough to actually do an investigation into this woman. But there was even a tweet from Kahindi Andrews where he was trying to say that it's not racist because at the end of the day, all you're trying to say is that being white is bad. Luckily, the police ignored that. However, the police still didn't do a very good job throughout the day as the night went on Sunday. This video was recorded in Trafalgar Square, which is where a lot of the violence seems to be happening.
Fighting is kicking off right now.
That must resign.
And why the police on stand down? Why the police on stand down? Can someone answer me this? Why the police on stand down? It's all orchestrated, it's all manufactured. Why are the police on stand down?
Yep, as you can see here, violence going on between the two groups. This is exactly what we were told the police were trying to stop happening. The intergroup conflict between the pro-Palestinians and the far right, quote unquote. And the police are literally there doing nothing. You have riot police there. They're not doing anything. They're not trying to break it up. They're not trying to arrest anybody. They're just standing there menacingly. And naturally, the Met Police had something to say about this video. Having reviewed the footage, it's clear the reaction of the officers was not what we had hoped to see. We are making further inquiries to understand what happened. Great. Nothing will come of it, I guarantee it once again. But despite everything we've seen today, I think the saddest part of all this isn't the violence. It's not the people crying out that Hitler was right, even though they are very offensive and obviously very, very wrong. The saddest part is that people at, I believe, Waterloo Station, who are simply just part of the poppy appeal during this entire mass crowd at Waterloo Station, who quite frankly shouldn't have been allowed to protest there, they were asked to move back away from this big protest multiple times. Realistically, the police should be the ones trying to protect people like this and allow them to go about their lawful business. In other words, the protest should move around these people, not these people move around the protests. And here they are moving again for a second time because the crowd just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger, becoming the focus of Remembrance Sunday rather than these people who should be the focus of Remembrance Sunday given that they are the poppy appeal. So it's no surprise that there are anonymous police officers coming out effectively saying that actually Suella Braverman was right to criticise the police about the biased and woke policing, as this article claims that they have seen appalling anti-Semitism, which we have seen as well, with mobs calling for jihad against Israel, and it's obvious to this person and to many of their fellow officers that there is a clear bias here. And that's all Suella Braverman was pointing out, by the way. It is obvious to me and many of my fellow officers that there is clear bias. This playing favourites is a symptom of years of wokery and political correctness that have completely transformed the culture of the Met, and which mean the force cannot cope any longer with disputes that involve inter-ethnic conflict. Put simply, senior officers are terrified of being accused of racism if they fully enforce the law against pro-Palestinian protesters. And this was also why the Manchester bomber managed to set off his bomb, because security didn't want to confront him because they didn't want to get called racist. When there is a group of extremists with large crowds chanting something that is clearly a hate crime, such as calling for Jews to be killed, you might expect police to force their way through and make arrests. But in the minds of senior officers, this could spiral into major physical confrontation, which is not an image they are comfortable with. Indeed, the idea that it is the police jobs to physically confront criminals is completely lost on many of those who lead the Met. So instead, officers are encouraged to film the protesters and try and make arrests later. And the problem with kid gloves approach, along with the obvious point that sometimes the offenders are not found, is that it causes huge damage to public confidence, and many ordinary people conclude that the police just aren't on their side. Yes. And there is the double standard. Anti-lockdown protests were policed much more forcibly because police chiefs knew that the protesters had no serious political support. As a result, there would be few complaints and MPs would not pile in and attempt to hound them out of their jobs. And as he says in another part of the article, the opposite happened with the Black Lives Matter protests, again because racism and pressure from Parliament. Oddly enough, specifically from Labour MPs, I would add, which really does go to show that the Tories really do have limited power, and I will get into that analysis in just a second. Because while Suella Braverman, as I went through last week, did criticise the police for not doing their jobs very well, and yes indeed said they were being selective, and as we can see, there were Met officers who did agree with her, given that she was somehow to blame for, as this police officer says, just general public attitudes towards the police being fairly low if they aren't seen to be actually doing their jobs properly. And because she criticised the police, Rishi Sunak sacked Suella Braverman as Home Secretary. Because we live in a complete clown world where if you make generally good criticisms of departments that your office oversees, you get sacked by the government. Suella Braverman has been sacked as Home Secretary after she defied Number 10 over an article accusing the Met Police of bias in the policing of protests. Mrs Braverman was accused of stoking tensions in the article ahead of the protests in London over the weekend. James Cleverly has been announced as a replacement, with former Prime Minister David Cameron unexpectedly replacing him as Foreign Secretary, because we live in a complete clown decade, where we have a clown government, where Rishi Sunak thinks the best thing he can do is get rid of someone who is pointing out genuine problems and replacing them with a yes man and a reheated Gordon Brown, I think we can call David Cameron, who isn't even an MP or a lord at this point, but I imagine that he will be getting a lordship to get that place in the cabinet. I could go through politicians' statements on, I'm going to do my best in this department, and it's been a great privilege to have been in this department, but at the end of the day, it's a serious analysis time here. Obviously, I'm just not going to vote Tories next time, because Sunak has absolutely no backbone to get done what needs to be done, and Liz Truss just was not allowed to even try and fix the relatively small issues of her mini-budget. And it just appears there's no party in government that actually is doing what most people in the UK actually want it to do, which is effectively close the borders, police the country properly, fund the NHS, even though obviously funding the NHS is not a good move and won't fix anything. It's what people want. And there obviously isn't a party even trying to do the popular thing of that, let alone what I want, which is not fund the NHS and make basically everything private, have proper pushback against these foreign and infiltrated forces, some of which are native as well, of course, that are within our universities and all our institutions, and just making life worse for absolutely everybody who considers themselves British. It's absolutely abysmal. I'm debating spoiling my ballot, but honestly I think it sends a better message to vote for Reform if they're standing in my area. Because while I don't think they will get voted in, and I don't think they'll even be necessarily that much better than the Tories, it does show them that they are going to lose support unless they move right. Because if you just don't vote and they start seeing statistics in percentages of Labour going right up, which is just because only 20% of people are going out to vote, they will still see that as a, oh god, we need to move even further left. And this is the problem with that clown decade. We are in a place where things are getting worse before they get better, because this is what all the incentives are shouting at them. Because at the end of the day, okay, yes, they do seem to care about the electorate to some degree, hence they're panicking, reshuffling, kicking out leaders and all that. But at the end of the day, why do you think the Home Secretary is little more than a mouthpiece of criticism for everything she is supposed to oversee, such as stopping the boats and sorting out the Met Police? The answer is because she can't do anything. The cabinet ministers have very little power over what is done within the offices. It is, every time they come out, it is what they say. We couldn't do anything done. There were, leftist activists within the organisation, leftist activists who were representing, in a legal sense, the people who were being deported, let's say. Long story short, these cabinet ministers clearly know where the problems are, and then they can't actually do anything about it. I don't believe that they don't want to do anything about it, or that it's, handlers from up above who are effectively saying, oh, please signal against exactly what we're doing while doing nothing about it. I just don't believe that Suella Braverman would do that. It honestly seems a lot more likely that at this point that you just put undesirable ministers into the Home Office if you want to get rid of them, because it is just a place full, and I mean to the brim, with controversies, because it's either a Windrush generation fail under Theresa May, where literally a department of the Home Office was moving offices and they didn't have as much storage space, so just destroyed a load of Windrush boarding passes or deportation cards, and then it caused a massive problem trying to decide who came in from the Windrush generation. And that ended up with Theresa May having to get kicked out of the Home Office. And then you've got Priti Patel, who again is trying to get people deported. She can't, and then gets kicked out for being useless. And now you have Suella Braverman, where the same thing has essentially happened. So don't be surprised if in a couple of years, even if the Tories last that long, which they won't, but don't be surprised if you see James Cleverly being kicked out. Or even under Starmer, you'll probably see the Home Secretary getting kicked out for similar reasons, because it is probably the worst job to have at the moment. You've been given a department that is on its knees and effectively being completely controlled by leftist activists and civil servants at this point, where if you want to go against whatever the overarching politics within the civil service are at that point, then just expect to get nothing done, and all you seem to be able to do is cause a bit of chaos by saying, a lot of these departments that we're supposed to be in control of, they're not doing their jobs properly. And believe it or not, I don't think there's anything I can do to actually stop that because of the amount of departments that have essentially just made their own autonomous zones. And this is something that's coming out of the COVID inquiry that absolutely no mainstream source is talking about. Effectively, the British government is, at the same time, one of the most centralised governments in the world, while at the same time being one of the most decentralised when it comes to its departments. Because there were stories that the the COVID task force, for lack of a better term, was getting its data through fax machines from a Department of Health, which had to have all of its Excel spreadsheets collated together by data entryers who had to get them from obviously all different hospitals all over the country. And there's just civil servants openly saying, yes, we're really the ones in charge. Yes, ministers were trying to avoid us because they didn't want to hear what they were actually going to be doing and actually plan things themselves. And, well, now we're seeing Sue Gray, who did the report on Boris Johnson, quote-unquote, lying to Parliament, has now gone straight over to work for Labour, and her son's in the running to become an MP. Effectively, if at this point you don't realise that we've just had Labour for the last 20-odd years, I don't know where you've been. There are plenty of right-wingers in the Tory membership and a few genuinely right-wing Tory MPs, and I would put Suella Braverman under that umbrella, along with Liz Truss and most of her cabinet. But as you can see, they are not allowed to do anything, whether it's by the civil service or by Tory HQ. They just get kicked out. They try and make their jobs as difficult as possible until they are in a position where the Prime Minister has to kick them out. And I can't see how this problem is going to get fixed until there is effectively a large-scale counter-revolution from the civil service taking power away from Parliament. Because this is effectively what happened under Blair and Brown. They gave a Supreme Court even more power, effectively power from the Lords. They then made all these departments that were, in theory, supposed to keep the government in check, and unfortunately, all it did was give them the entirety of the power of Parliament, effectively. Because why do you think immigration numbers haven't gone down? Why do you think nothing's being done about deportations? It's because people in the civil service don't want it to happen, and therefore it doesn't happen. They don't bother trying to make the infrastructure. They don't want to make the infrastructure. They want to do the opposite of make the infrastructure. And so at some point you have to think, well, there's no way that's sustainable. There's way too many people in the country that don't want to emigrate and will refuse to emigrate because it is such a poor country at the moment. I mean, what do you think they're going to do? The police weren't even working to stop violence in the streets over the weekend. They didn't do a particularly good job of stopping the far-righties, quote-unquote. And that's supposed to be the only target that they can actually make, because the civil service seems to read The Guardian a lot. I know people in the civil service that still say Andy No is a far-right white supremacist. I know people in the civil service that specifically move from one department to the other because they'd have to start working on stopping the boats. It is full of complete radicals, and genuinely the only way to fix it is to clear them out, and that's nothing short of a counter-revolution. And there's no way the Tories are going to do that. Labour are only going to make it worse, and the alternate right-wing parties are all a joke, so what am I supposed to do, you know? All I can do is ride this out, try and make my own life better, make it through this pretty tough time, and just hope for the best on the other side of Clown Decade. Only another year till we're halfway through, and trust me, by 2027, I think you'll start things getting slightly better. Possibly slightly later than that, but look, the 70s were a much worse time than this, and then we went through Thatcher's time through the 80s, and it's massively improved Britain. I can see a similar thing happening, we just have to be patient and make the right plays. At this point in time, there's no hope with the Tories, so don't give them your vote. But I do think the route to fixing these problems are still through the Tories. It's just at the moment, You need to punish them for going back to the New Labour playbook. Expect more violence in the streets, I guess. Expect the Met Police to not do too much about all these marches, and expect way more of these marches, I suppose, because I don't know what else you can expect. Anyway, another blackpilling Monday video there, so I hope you enjoyed it. The other side of the hill, of course, will be back tomorrow evening, where I will be talking even more about all these issues, and Laughing at the Guardian should be on next Saturday. I'm yet to get guests for it. If you could please like, comment, subscribe to me, that would really help the channel grow. But as I said, that is everything I had for you for now. So once again, thank you very much for watching, and until next time, goodbye.